Chapter 6. We are the Praetorians. We are the shield of the Triarchs. Ours are the eyes that see. Ours is the chastening rod. The Praetorian Ode. The Nihilak cruiser, lord of antiquity, birthed on second moon of Serenade, 350 years before next tomb opening. "Spare me no details in this report," said Executioner Phileas. "I want nothing held back." "Of course, Executioner," said Trazyn. "Our efforts—" "I wasn't finished," she cut in. "Assume that I have read your reports with interest, because I have. You will talk, I will ask questions, and when it's finished I will either extend the Awakened Council's sponsorship of this expedition or revoke it. Are we all understood?" "Yes," said Trazyn. Orokin nodded after a sufficiently insolent pause. "Do not give me a simplified version, but be efficient. I have many responsibilities that have nothing to do with this backwater, and would like to be on my way as soon as possible." "We would prefer that as well," said Orokin. "Wouldn't we, Trazyn? Don't enlist me in your juvenilia, diviner," he said in return. "I cannot speak for Master Orokin, but my part of the research is quite simple, at least in relative terms." He called up a Fosglyph panel that showed waveforms and a glyph sequence made up entirely of the numerals 1 to 5. "I have identified an emanation coming from deep within the planet. The number chain: 3211 stop, 1545 stop, 4131 stop, 5322. We are unsure of the transmission source or the equipment from which it comes, or even what it means, but—" "Perhaps say what we do know, then," said Orokin. Trazyn tilted his head, oculars rotating in a withering look. "We know it travels through the planet's strange geology, that it carries the same strength when detected on the surface, but appears to reverberate with much more strength through cave systems, particularly in the island archipelago that makes up the most populous hemisphere." "Odd," said Phileas, "for islands to be the population centers." "Islands were far easier for the first wave of human settlers to defend," answered Trazyn. "But yes, it is unusual. What is more unusual, however, is how this emanation, known as the Song of Serenade in local folklore, has affected life on this planet. It is generally subaudible, but detectable with suitably advanced technology. Yet it has affected the local culture to a significant extent." Trazyn pulled up a human musical bar, its notes walking up and down the lines. "Odd equation," said Orokin, leaning close. "This is a well-known local folk melody. It's pentatonic, 5 notes to the octave. Do you see?" The Executioner and the Diviner looked at him, expressions blank. "Perhaps a demonstration," he said, clearly disappointed. He adjusted the music and pulled up the numerical glyph sequence beside it. "So, now instead of numeral glyphs, let's turn this into a chart, shall we?" Trazyn moved his hands through the air, converting the sequence of number glyphs to 5 horizontal lines, numbered bottom to top. Each glyph lay on the line its number represented. Orokin, one finger on his beard, dropped his hand to the table with a hard knock. "They match," he said, looking from one to the other. "Trazyn, this is good work." "I sent you the data," Trazyn grumbled. Phileas looked at Orokin. "Am I to understand you did not know about this, Master Orokin? You are supposed to be working as a team." "I have been cloistered in deep meditation," the astromancer sneered. "Were I to break a trance every time Lord Trazyn had a pet theory, I would still be casting my initial divinations and spheres of focus." Phileas spoke, her oculars fixed on Orokin. And these deep scratches on your necrodermis, they seem rather fresh. Have you had an accident?" Orican ran a thumb over the deep furrow on his golden headdress. "A run-in with an alien creature below ground," he said. "Not native, but Lord Trazen assures me they are becoming more common in this sector. Is that not correct, Lord Trazen?" "Absolutely. An unusual occurrence, certainly, but nothing untoward." "Nothing untoward," she repeated. Her oculars passed between them. "This signal, Lord Trazen, what does it mean?" "Perhaps everything. It is a signal from deep underground. The world's inhabitants have unknowingly picked it up. It's literally in their bones. I have tracked waveform growth patterns in skeletal remains that conform to this sequence. Furthermore, it's in the song of birds, insect trills, arachnid webs, even the growth patterns of seashells that are more lopsided here rather than the traditional spiral." "Meaning?" "We know this was a tomb world, if one meant to inter only a single pharaon. This could be the thrumming of a stasis generator's reactor, or a repeated funerary chant." "Or a signal," finished Orican. "Yes," confirmed Trazen. "That is possible, though if so it is coded, and we are missing some key to properly decipher it. Perhaps if Master Orican spends some time out of his trance field, I have been doing important work." "Then tell us about it," said Executioner Phileas. "After communing with the Eternity Gate and the Mysterios, delving the consciousness of its builder, I have come across information that there is a second gate." Phileas, back already lance straight, leaned forward expectantly. "It is a fail-safe gate, one that activates on a different interval than the last gate we activated. Since due to Lord Trazen's interference, the primary gate will be shut for 2 millennia. "And the fail-safe?" said Phileas, jumping in before the two could get going. "We may be able to open it early, well before the scheduled exterminatus." "Have you found it?" "Investigations are ongoing. I have, however, learned a great deal about the gate's architect, the data sorceress Vishani, her methods and manner of thinking." "Master Orican," responded Phileas, "having given a fair amount of reports myself, I know when someone is making immobility sound like progress. It seems to me that the two of you are working this question from different directions. Could it be that the Serenade emanation comes from the failsafe gate?" "It could," said Trazen. "Did you not consider investigating that possibility?" "I did," responded Trazen, "but it would require going underground for a significant period, and given the communication problems inherent in the geology, I would not want to go too deep and risk missing our check-in." "Then you have a path forward," said Phileas. "I approve your extension on the condition that within a year you go into the tunnels together. And there best not be any more untoward encounters with exotic alien species. Yes?" Orican stared, hands in a meditation position meant to increase calm and dissipate rage. "Very well." Trazen banished the Foscliffe panels and turned to go. "We'll leave you. Are you coming, Astromancer?" Orican followed, ocular hooded by its cover. "One more thing, lords." Phileas knocked the table. "Had either of you come across evidence of High Metallurgist Quelka?" They had not. "Please, Vishani, where is the failsafe gate?" "Not everything is retained, Orican. Long years in the crypt have corrupted my engram banks. I cannot tell you the exact location, except that it lies beneath." "This emanation, the Song of Serenade, are you sending it?" A pause. "Orican, do not listen to the signal. It is dangerous. Ruin lies there." "We are to follow the emanation tomorrow. Trazen believes it can lead us to the failsafe gate. and it might at that, but not all signals are to be listened to. Follow it if you must, but do not try to decipher it. Do not dwell on it. As you well know, data can change the systems that take it in. Data can carry a curse. That is impossible. Discernment makes a believer a fanatic. The political treatise turns the indifferent into a revolutionary. A lie exposed ruins a friendship. New information always affects the system that consumes it, at times catastrophically. That is the curse of data. All data. But data can be corrupted as well. How is this data corrupted? No answer. Vashani? To even speak of it may bring it upon you. That is the danger of information. Follow the signal, Orokin, but shut your mind to the analysis of it. Promise me this. You do not want what it contains. Orokin thought for a long time. I promise. Thank you, my equal. Now, let us turn towards your study of astromantic empowerment. You have discovered how to open your systems to the cosmos, how the energy of space-time travels along lines like on a circuit board, and how the positioning of stars reorients that energy. But have you discovered how to modify your necrodermis in order to maximize the energy collected? Is that possible? Then let us have another automantic writing session. I can give you the diagrams. Subject, alert. Capital Slasher. Transmission, via secure uplink. Recipients, precinct lieutenants and above. Do not disseminate. Step up patrols in Abyssal District. Appeal to public for information. Dismiss/denigrate reports of cult activity. Suppress any workers' collective demanding a work stoppage as a result of the killings. At 0430, enforcers responded to a report of a foul odour emanating from a storm drain in the Abyssal District. See attached street grid. Upon entering, they found the body of Glavius Wyman, an Administratum maintenance employee who worked on the system, in an advanced state of decomposition. Injuries are consistent with the 4 other presumed victims of the so-called Capital Slasher. Wyman's death is consistent with previous victims, who also lived or worked on the underground. According to Administratum pay garnishment records, Wyman stopped reporting for work 8 standard days ago. Medicae Mortis technicians suggest that last week's artificial monsoon rains carried the body from the site of the original murder until it snagged on a pipe grate. At this time, there appears no ritualized component to the killings that suggests cult activity. Current hypothesis remains that this is the work of a compulsion killer. However, spurious rumors persist that these homicides are the work of cults. Discourage this tendency by charging rumor-mongers with second-degree sedition under the subversion statutes. Use first-degree charges if the subject is part of the so-called underground workers' collective, and uses the ongoing killings as justification for work stoppage. See List of subversive groups. End memorandum. Thought for the day. The law is the Emperor's will incarnate. Chapter 7. A bizarre urban legend passes among the pickpocket gangs of Serenade City. On double moon nights, it is said, a figure in a long coat walks the rougher parts of town with jewelled necklaces and watch chains dangling from his pockets. But any unfortunate urchin who tries to delve into this bounty will find themselves snared by the fishhooks sewn into the man's pockets. That is when his hand, each finger replaced by a long razor, appears, and the finger-snatcher takes his due. Legends and Wraith Tales of Old Serenade. Trazyn the Infinite, overlord of Solemnes, archivist of the prismatic galleries, and witness of 1,000 epochs, stared with fascination at the puppet show. He did so from a distance, high in the steeple of the Basilica of the God Emperor's Ascension. Its arches and gargoyles provided ample camouflage, and the height offered a sweeping view of the comings and goings in Settlement Plaza. He wore a simple brown hood and cowl, like a monk's, that blended his form from a distance, and, along with the illusion emitter, served to ensure that even the bell-ringers would think little of him, if they managed to catch a glimpse in their peripheral vision. But it was, essentially, unnecessary. No one ventured up this far. Below, the soft peach-coloured sunset was splashing across the square, casting a pleasant glow over the marble buildings that looked so much like polished bone. A lamplighter drifted from post to post, a ladder on one shoulder and a Promethean burner in the other, preparing for nightfall. The show could not begin performing until twilight. It was a shadow theatre, with its audience of children sitting on both sides of the little structure. On one side, lit with gas lamps, they could see the flat, painted leather puppets dancing with their sinuous jointed limbs as they paraded in front of a stretched piece of thin canvas. On the other side, the audience watched the shadows cast on the white sheet. The same story, the same actions, but in silhouette. Older children and some adults walked circuits around the theatre to see the performance from all angles. "It's a settlement myth," said Trazyn. "St. Madrigal, calling the faithful to serenade." "Entrancing," responded Orican. "If one of the puppets strikes the other, or perhaps makes some flatulent gas emission, please do let me know." "Unlikely. The subject matter in these shadow theatres is generally historical-liturgical, the fall of Vandaia, Macharian conquests, lives of the saints, and that kind of thing. If you prefer farce—" He gestured across the square, where a masked troop of players tumbled and hooted as a lecherous bishop, his mitre askew and arms grasping, chased a giggling courtesan across the small stage. Just before being grabbed, the clever dame dipped out from under the embrace and left the clergyman amorously embracing a performer in a donkey mask. The crowd howled, and a performer masked as King Mischief stepped forward to give a sarcasm-laden lecture on those who let petty vices consume them. "For all my aeons, I cannot understand how you draw anything meaningful from this drivel. You know the Empire will have to destroy these humans eventually, correct? To study a culture gives one an indication of where it came from, sometimes where it's going. What we learn can be extrapolated to other species. Besides, we will need some as thralls." Trazyn enhanced his oculars, zeroing in on a xylophone player sitting next to the puppet stage. "You notice, for example, that this musician's battle melody weaves in the Song of Serenade." "I did not, and care not to." He paused. "In fact, why do we not agree that this portion of the inquiry will be your purview?" "It's getting dark," Trazyn said. "It's time to move." The pair translated to the crypt, and, enfolded in robes and with illusion emitters lit, moved out into the city streets. They had to be more careful now. Some spree killer had been active in Serenade City, and the enforcers were keeping a greater eye out, possibly using scanners. They skirted the edge of the square, avoiding the crowds, letting the emitters work with the shadows. As Orican passed the stage where the players capered and juggled, he noticed a bizarre detail. "That performer, the one with the tatty crown. King Mischief, yes? He has a third arm." Trazyn smiled. "Indeed. One of the performer's arms is false, I noticed. It allows his free arm to perform the mischief, picking pockets or planting incriminating evidence." "A pickpocket," said Orican. "No wonder you're interested." King Mischief, from the volumes I've read, is a saboteur who shakes up the social order and exposes hypocrites. The scripts are, I understand, tightly vetted by the Administratum. They passed through deep shadows, down the long stairs and slopes of what was once Coral Shelf, and ascended to the abyssals, the sprawling slum built on the great plain below. A plain that had once been a seafloor, before the Orcs had pumped billions of drums of water out in order to cool their reactors. Before the planetary government, while still riding high off denouncing the Orcoid tyranny, realized that they too could sell the water to passing Imperial naval vessels and trade ships, thus opening new land for development. Now, much of the ocean was gone, retreated into the smaller basin of the deep sea. "Note," said Trazyn, "how even these bare hab-blocks all have window boxes, little gardens, vegetables, flowers, and each of them carved in the rune-like patterns inherited, knowingly or not, from the Eldari. Fascinating, isn't it? Short-lived vermin borrowing from long-lived degenerates. I don't understand your fascination with humans, Trazyn. I admit they have their poor qualities, certainly. Unrefined, without question. Superstitious, no doubt. And primitive, fractious and grasping as well. Besides, their biology is disgusting. Everything they consume for energy eventually kills them. Their digestive tracts are literal colonies of bacteria, and their reproductive system is the same as their waste elimination system. Did you know that?" Orokin grimaced, as if he had not known it, and preferred to live in a state of ignorance. "It's true," Trazyn insisted. "I've done the dissections. Yet, despite all those difficulties, they've done a great deal in the galaxy. Their empire may, in time, eclipse the extent that ours was at its height. Perhaps it does already. They have not the coordination to tell. They are born weak, mature slowly, have short lifespans, and in a galaxy packed with creatures that come into the world fully grown and armed with fangs and armored with bone, they have still managed to become the dominant force through technology and will." Trazyn paused, as if weighing whether to trust Orokin with his next sentence. "They remind me a bit of us, or rather how we used to be. Ambitious, but short-lived." Orokin growled, a displeasing buzzing in his vocal emitters. "We had greater technology, and their lives are much longer than ours were." "Not by much," Trazyn chided. "Not really, particularly given that they cannot use stasis crypts during star voyages, as we did. Oh, they artificially extend them with drug treatments and augmetics, or the awful surgeries of the Astartes. Ugh. But that is a very small minority. Most are, overall, adjusted to their short lives. They consider it enough." "They know nothing better," said Orokin, with a note of bitterness. "Our truncated, tumor-cursed lives had to be lived in the shadow of the immortal Old Ones. Before that, we, too, accepted our fate." "Do you think that, given the choice, they would trade their souls for immortality, as we did?" "As you did," said Orokin. "I resisted. I saw the delusion. You were only too willing to trade in that broken body of yours." Trazyn stopped. "I went to the flames of biotransference in chains. It is distinct in my engrams. I can picture it with clarity. The lock collar around my throat, metal hands, tireless, grasping my shoulders. They took me in my library. The one who did it, Nylax, was a Sortek warden, one of the Stormlord's vassals." Orokin stared at him, ocular rotating, as if searching his death mask, looking for the telltale sign of power rerouting that might signal a lie. "We remember it differently then," he said. And though Orokin's words often carried the lingering kiss of acid, these in particular burned. After all, you are the historical expert, are you not? The diviner turned, and they walked the rest of the 6-mile way in silence, arriving just before dawn. By night, the sewer pumping station was deserted. Slipping in was not difficult. The watchman, whom Trazyn implanted with a mind-shackle scarab, opened the lock and let them into the old underground network. The abyssal sewers were only a few centuries old, but in poor repair. Constant battering by the monsoon rains, artificially induced via cloud seeding, since the oceans were no longer large enough to support the climate's optimal rainfall, meant that maintenance crews had to work on the system year-round. "Please don't tell me we'll need to climb through human waste," said Orokin. "This is not a waste network," Trazyn assured him. "This is water evacuation. Serenade's archipelago is a monsoon climate, with heavy rains half the year. Now induced artificially, of course. Given that the abyssal was formerly seafloor, you can imagine the flooding risk down here." Orokin grunted. "These tunnels also stock the underground systems that sustain the planet, which is where we're headed." "Where you found the signal?" "Where my sensor scarabs found the signal," he corrected. "Water is an excellent conductor of vibration, and whatever is down there, it's broadcasting strong." The body floated face down, its bloated wrists swelling against the buttoned sleeves of the blue maintenance jumpsuit. Or at least, it had once been blue. Long immersion had leached much of the cheap dye into the water. And it was not the only body. Orokin could see at least 5 others floating on the lapping waters of the cistern, its surface rippling as the midnight rains trickled more fluid into the lightless cavern of the world's water supply. It had taken them 3 local days to get this far down. "Turn it over," said Orokin. "You turn it over," Trazyn shot back. "I thought the mysteries of the human form were but old prophecies to you. Surely you cannot tell me you refuse to—" Yes, very well." Trazyn waded waist-deep into the water, hooked a finger on the jumpsuit, and rolled the corpse over. "This damage is quite extensive." "You're saying humans don't normally look like this?" Orokin jabbed. Trazyn ran a spectromantic analysis, raising a hand and bombarding the body with reflective lasers. "Normally, I would say this was post-mortem damage from some scavenger. The avian lizards in the sewer can grow to be quite large and aggressive. The bloating makes things difficult, of course, but I doubt even the largest could cause such a dramatic fracture to the right ocular orbital. Look, it runs straight through to the upper palate. What flesh remains appears to have been gouged with some metal weapon or tool. A claw. A bit of a leap, dear Astromancer," said Trazyn, not looking up from his examination. "This trauma in the chest cavity is quite extensive, however. If the rib fractures did not give it away as perimortem injury, I would, as I have said, thought it to be the work of a large scavenger. As it is, it may be some kind of tool. Indeed, on the left side only the false ribs remain. It almost appears as if the attacker grabbed the sternum and tore ribs 1 through 8 out, separating the right side of the costal cartilage with a slash and yanked the ribs from the ligament connections to the vertebrae. He was eaten." "I know it appears that way, but—" Trazyn turned. "Ah, I see." Orokin hovered a hand's breadth above the water's surface, legs crossed, his inbuilt repulsor drives making little rippling dimples in the surface of the cistern. His ocular was shut tight, head back. Before him, his dexterous hands danced in precise movements, as though he were unfurling a scroll before him. "It did not happen here. Death came in the tunnels above. He did not see what killed him. It came from the side, out of the dark, avoiding his torch beam. You see this? Imperfectly, said Orokin. I can only reconstruct based on evidence, not a true vision, but a forensic projection extrapolated from his injuries and the lingering trauma patterns burned in his neural pathways. And what do you see? Claws. Orokin opened his ocular. Long claws. A predator's weapon. It hit him from the side. The attacker's hard cranium. Head down like a ram, causing the incapacitating skull trauma. He pointed. Minor defensive wounds on the arms. He was stunned on his back. The pelvic bone. You missed that, dear colleague. Gained the hairline fracture when it knelt on him. And then it tore into the chest with its claws and teeth. And teeth? Orokin waved a hand, bringing up a chrysoprase model of one of the remaining ribs, spun it so he could see. Dentition marks of pointed teeth, and more important, dental scoring, meaning he was still alive when it ate him, said Trazyn, and paused. This reconstruction, engram images, is that what you see when you speak to Vishani? Orokin snapped off his repulsors, settling into the water, and said, Shall we go deeper? 4 days later, they cut through a natural cavern wall and discovered the tomb shaft. It was straight and regular, diving down in long stairways and rising in right-angle switchbacks. Divorced from the water network, the air was dry to the point of desiccation, and that's where they found the bone chamber. They sensed it before they saw it, not due to the odour of decay, for they were no longer in the water network, but due to a signal return that suggested human material. They had been taking precautions since finding the bodies. First, they found the skulls, packed row upon row, ranked on the walls of the chamber so their eyeless sockets stared out. To a human, it would have been overawing, sacred or blasphemous, depending on one's divine allegiance. To an immortal Necron, long alienated from death's terror, it was merely a sign of heightened danger. Even when they trod into the wider chamber, weapons in hand and feet refashioned so a cushion of lattice necrodermis quieted each footstep, they did not reflect on the long bones that formed triumphal arches across the path, the rib cages dangling from the ceiling like lanterns. The articulated skeletons kneeling on either side of the walkway, heads bowed and hands prostrate against the floor, as if living gods processed down the centre of the chamber. In a way, they did. Analysis says some of these bones are old, signalled Trazyn. Centuries old. Not all of them, Orokin signalled back. A waypoint indicator appeared in Trazyn's vision, and he saw that one of the kneeling skeletons was in the process of being built, torn flesh still clinging to some of the cobbled-together parts. The left side of its ribcage, including ribs 1 through 8, were thick with clotted blood. Trazyn's oculars drifted up the pathway. And of course, there's that, he signalled, ending the message with a glyph indicating wry amusement. At the end of the chamber was a great set of Carcharodon jaws, framing the enormous gateway to the next chamber. Chanting echoed from the black door. Trazyn took the left side, Orokin the right. The chamber was massive, bigger even than the one they had battled over during the early days of Serenade's settlement, when a colonial island town lay above them rather than a massive basin city. Huge braziers bracketed a central promenade, its floor swept clean. Unlike the antechamber, there were no bones here. Whatever vicious intelligence had built the Cathedral of Slaughter obviously considered this sacred space a place that must remain unpolluted. Apart from the altar that stood before the huge Eternity Gate, its black stone frame, preserved perfectly as if the stones had just been shaped, rising over a wide staircase. The thing, hunched and chittering, stooped before the Necron monument, mumbling some kind of prayer. Orokin swept out a hand, ran a scry. "It is human," Orokin signalled, then corrected himself. "No, not entirely, but at least part of it." The creature's head snapped around, as if it had detected them. Orokin saw it pivot towards Trazyn, baleful eyes glowing in the darkness. "Trazyn, on your guard!" Too late. The fool had taken his eye off the creature to examine a steely at the base of one of the braziers. Collecting. Always collecting. And the thing had already closed half the distance. By the time he snapped his attention back to the attacker, it had cut its way back and forth through several braziers, breaking the line of sight so Trazyn could not predict its angle of attack. A shadow in the dark. Orokin watched as Trazyn made a blind defensive swing the left side of the brazier, hoping to catch the foul thing with his obliterator as it came around the corner. Instead, it vaulted onto the dead brazier, nimbly catching purchase on the top with its hooked limbs before diving down on the archivist, claws flashing in the glow of Trazyn's reactor core. Orokin ran, but the chamber's huge scale meant the thing would have precious moments to scour the archivist. Judging by the chamber they'd passed through and the bodies they had seen, it was clearly masterful at murder. Frenzied, yet surgically precise. What ill star must a being be born under to gain those abilities? Trazyn slammed the blackstone hard, skidded. His obliterator tumbled from his grip with the impact of the creature, and he needed both hands to fend off the vicious assault of its claws. Through the knife talons, he could see a leering skull face. It hissed and warbled. Shrill notes that confused his systems, translated into his ocular vision as a line of number glyphs, ever repeating, filling his visual field like a monsoon flood. 3211, 1545, 4131, 5322. 3211, 1545, 4131, 5322. 3211, 1545, 4131, 5322. Trazyn pistoned upward with his legs, trying to throw it off. It hung on, one set of talons lodged deep in his scapular plate. But the kick gave him space. He reared back and punched the thing in its skull, fist-shaped so the two central knuckles stuck out to deliver all the energy to a single point. The thing's skull shattered, came away from its face in pieces. Trazyn tried to get a grip on it and throw the creature, but each time his hands found purchase, the bony exoskeleton snapped away in handfuls of ossified calcium. Bones. The whole thing was covered in human bone. He felt the long claw sink between his scapular shoulder plate and his ribcage, worming down through his systems, searching for his central reactor. Piercing the casing so fluid spilled through his system and ran down his vertebrae. Felt the long surgical claw separate the fuel rods deep inside him. No surrogates this time. I could just let it happen, thought Orokin. It would be so simple to stand by and watch Trazyn be butchered by this monster, to prepare himself for the attack, take time to calculate a blow that would smash its frame with his staff. He had done it the last time a creature had attacked him in the tunnels, a creature he was nearly sure Trazyn had released. It would be mathematical justice, balance the equation. Yet, for reasons he could not wholly understand, he felt himself running back the timeline, watching himself speed backward as the creature sailed through the air and back onto the brazier, hopping down onto the floor. Maybe it was the way Trazyn had characterized his biotransference, or the fact that, despite his obnoxious pretense of being kind to Orokin, a thing Trazyn only did, the Astromancer knew, because he found it so irritating, he had in fact found the Eternity Gate. Or because after so many eons, it was in fact nice to converse with a being approaching his own level. Whether out of utility or sentimentality, he burst back into the timeline. Right hand already formed into Hakavi's axiom, and the left spread in the gesture of targeting, aiming the bolt of antimatter. Orokin pumped his right hand towards his left, sending the colourless, lightless stream of agitated particles racing across the antechamber. The top of the brazier disintegrated, blasted apart by the particle stream. The creature tumbled through air, smashing into the black stone and scattering bones around it. In a flash, it was back on its feet, roaring something unintelligible, howling and warbling with fury. Except this time, it streaked directly for Orokin. He summoned another bolt, missed, saw its loping stride come closer, and crouched, preparing to meet it with his staff. It came low, dodging and scuttling, long knife-blade fingers extended to grab and disembowel. And he heard the thing speak, a gibberish chain of numbers, a loop of insanity. And Orokin knew it would get past his guard, knew it would sink those long talons into him, because who could stand up to a mad horror like this? He might strike it once or twice, but without the empowering stars he could not stand up to it for long. He braced for the attack. And then it stopped, frozen, hands splayed. For a moment, Orokin thought he had stopped the timeline, thrown a chronostatic hex via an unconscious reflex, until he saw Trazyn step around the frozen horror, hand extended and a stasis beam hazing the air. "Do you hear what it's saying?" Orokin stepped forward to inspect the thing, his staff raised in case it moved. "It's the signal," said Trazyn. "The anomaly we've been following. The stronger signal repeating the Song of Serenade. This is the Broca source. It's repeating it over and over, screaming it out into the dark." "Never mind that," said Orokin. "We have larger problems. Do you not recognize who this is?" Trazyn stepped around to the front, peered closer. "Dead gods," he swore. "It's High Metallurgist Quelka." Chapter 8. Klundagore. "We deceived them. We brought the night, and soon we shall flay them. They will be ours, body and mind." War in Heaven, Act 5, Scene 3, Line 2. Eternity Gate, Serenade. 252 years until Exterminatus. "You have been away a long time, my equal." "Deep apologies. I have duties. The Great Awakening has begun, and my dynasty needs guidance. Or rather, those who have awoken need guidance. The Sotek have arisen from their crypts into civil war. There are many in my dynasty who have asked me to read their futures." "And make their futures?" "Let us keep that between us, shall we? The future cannot always be left to the vagaries of fate. At times it must be built. If I stood back, the dynasty would destroy itself. Certain matters need to be attended to, even after opening the Cephris complex. I cannot use what lies inside if the Infinite Empire has destroyed itself in the meantime." "Last time we spoke, I asked whether you were ready. Are you ready now, Orokin?"
"It is not an easy thing for me, Vishani. When I told them about biotransference, about the inferno I saw, they called me mad, a partisan. None could see it, or they did not want to see it. I was the only one who discerned the true nature of the C'tan. I tried to save them, and they persecuted me. Then they seized me with metal hands and cast me into the fire with them. It is hard to be truthful, to open one's mind to another after that." I listened. Nepareth listened. You say that you were the only one to see it, but that is ego, my equal. And for one of your abilities, ego is an easy beast to surrender to. But you are not the only one. We fought the Catan. Nepareth gave his unspoiled life against them. You have taken their persecution into your mind, and now you use it to persecute yourself. Have I not trusted you?
You have.
Have I not helped you unlock the burning stars and smite your foes? I am ever appreciative. I have worked for your release, but not, it seems, enough to lower the armor of your mind. It is so lonely here, Orokin. And if you let me in, trusted me, then I could show you how to open the Eternity Gate well before this world is due to crack and split.
We have time. I have not exhausted all avenues.
Are you afraid of me, Orokin? Is it because of the cryptek?
To contract the Flare virus is beyond imagining, and it carries thought to thought. Trazyn has been in quarantine. He saw the thing's neural emanations in his own oculus. So far, he does not appear infected, but
I am not infected, Orokin.
But if you were, you might not realize.
I am not infected because I never dwelled upon the signal. It has been here since construction, a part of the very geology. Indeed, a very good passive defense it is, too. We lost 7 architects to it while building the tomb, but quickly learned to screen it out. Not to listen. Just like I told you not to listen. Is that not correct?
Yes, that is correct.
Follow if you must, I said, but do not try to solve it. So long as you do not dwell upon it, you will be safe. And you are safe. Perhaps not your colleague, Trazyn, but you are.
Is there a way to cure him?
If he is infected, no. He may never return to this world. And, if he does not, you will need to complete the work. Let me show you how. Only briefly.
I need more time.
Well then, you are fortunate. We have time. But my equal, we have less than you think.
Prismatic Galleries, Solemnes, 244 years until Exterminatus.
And you are saying that you found the High Metallurgist like this?
Executioner Phileas edged up to the hermetic box, head tilting as she leaned towards the field. Orokin and Trazyn exchanged glances.
A hurtful insinuation, Trazyn said. And ignorant, Orokin added. Lady Executioner, even a cryptek of my powers does not have enough understanding of the Flare virus to infect a subject, not without exposing him, and therefore myself, to other infected. A dangerous prospect, and Quelka, to be blunt, was not worth that risk.
On the other side of the field, the thing that had been High Metallurgist Quelka cocked its head, mirroring Phileas's body language. Its exoskeleton was caked a finger-width deep in blood, smeared over so many centuries that it permanently stained his necrodermis. A hollow human skull lay on his narrow head like a mask, the sickly yellow glow of his monocular peering out from behind the punch-through sockets. Bones and shroud strips of desiccated skin dangled from his frame. Phileas raised a hand, wiggled the fingers, and watched the scalpel-like digits move in turn. She took a step sideways, and, hesitant and clumsy, the cryptek did the same. Then the horror lunged towards her, and the hermetic field discharged with a snap of dimensional realignment, throwing the cursed cryptek back. It scuttled into a corner and cowered there, its parchment-thin sheets of skin smouldering. Phileas herself leapt backward, her hands up in a guard position.
Yes, it does that on occasion, said Orokin, floating in his repulsor field with his monocular closed. Quelka was ever the mimicker. Find a bit of research progress in your work and follow in your footsteps. Then, at the last minute, try to stab you in the throat and take it for himself.
Trazyn shook his head.
Inappropriate.
Phileas wheeled on him.
Really, Master Orokin, you speak as if he is not here. He isn't.
Orokin's monocular snapped open to regard Phileas.
Quelka is 4 millennia dead. Do you think any of him remains in that?
The thing that was Quelka was not listening. It was on its front, nudging a human skull with a claw and scuttling over its loping roll. The first decade, they learned that it would become aggressive unless sufficiently stimulated. Trazyn's museum had ample supply of such diversions. Trazyn waved a hand, rendering the field opaque and soundproof. He preferred not to look at the creature overmuch.
How about it? Orokin jibed. Do you see the great high metallurgist in this form?
Perhaps not. Phileas turned away from the field and took a step back, so she could regard both of her charges without turning her back on the creature, even contained.
But you could at least come to ground and provide me some respect as a representative of the Praetorians. Pity, said Orokin. We had rather expected an apology.
Apology? Yes, an apology, said Trazyn. For over a millennium, the Awakened Council branded us as suspected murderers, impinged our reputations, deeply impacted our relations with other dynasties. At least, when we have even had time to see to our own affairs. This project, which we magnanimously carve out time for in order to benefit the Empire, has stolen a great deal of focus. We demand a formal apology and retraction from the Council.
Impossible, said Phileas.
Impossible? Trazyn stamped the floor with the butt of his obliterator.
Do you see how I am forced to live?
Phileas took in the hermetic field containing Trazyn, the table full of scrolls and strange alien artifacts, the piles of leather-bound tomes, the way he had worn his chin shiny from rubbing it with his fingers. Decades of quarantine, indeed, had not been kind.
You must admit, Lord Trazyn,
said Orokin with a wry smile,
that you make a fine addition to this gallery, and you do so enjoy my visits. I dare say I am better company than the high metallurgist here.
Trazyn flashed the sign of Vok, a metaphysically obscene gesture that, in simple terms, indicated that Trazyn hoped the diviner would, in all timelines and dimensions, come to a brutal and humiliating end. Orokin flashed it back, and Trazyn gave a low chuckle.
Lord Trazyn is quite right, Executioner, said Orokin. We have brought back the supposedly murdered Quelka. Why are we not entitled?
Because the Awakened Council is dissolved. Osuaria still lives, and Baalbek, though they are at war.
And Zuberkar? Trazyn stepped forward, hand touching the cartouche on his chest as a ward against ill luck.
Destroyed. He and Baalbek came to blows in the council chamber. With the Great Awakening imminent, Baalbek staged a coup, tried to consolidate power and hold the council world himself. Think of it. The rising from 60 million years of slumber to find the order disturbed, the silent king and triarch absent, the guiding hand of Sarek and his dynasty removed, awakening dynasties realizing they might burn rival worlds as the enemies still repose in their sarcophagi. An unprecedented opportunity for advancement. But it is ending. Now that the Sotek are rising, the other dynasties will scatter for the shadows, Orokin said with clear relish.
The Sotek are ensnared in a civil war, Phileas said dismissively.
Your Ferrum slain in his crypt, the rest eating each other over his throne, none of them more civilized than the monster Quelka has become.
True, very true. Orokin closed his monocular and resumed floating.
and I admit some hand in the current unpleasantness. Many Pharaons and would-be Pharaons have sought my unerring gaze during these troubled times. But I will give this counsel for nothing. The strength of the Soltec has never rested in our Pharaons. What is that supposed to mean? Phileas tapped her rod of covenant on the Blackstone. Are you speaking of the Stormlord? He is dead, his sarcophagus atomized by rivals before he could awaken. If you say it is true, Orokin paused, then it must be true. Shall we turn back to the matter at hand? Under whose purview do we fall, if not that of the awakened council? Mine, the Praetorians. Most decisions of the council have been reversed, but I fought to allow you to continue your work unmolested by other dynasties. She gave each of them a look, laden with gravity. You two may be absurd, venal little children, but the work you do is crucial to our future, and I truly believe it cannot be accomplished by anyone else.
Thank you, said Trazyn. We think you're an absurd, venal child, too. Phileas opened her mouth to reply. Would you like to hear what we've discovered? Said Trazyn. He waved a hand, and the field surrounding Quelker snapped back to translucent. The corrupted metallurgist was standing just behind the field, as if it had been listening as they spoke. We discovered the Eternity Gate by following a signal broadcast in the Song of Serenade, one that was stronger, slightly out of step from the general thrumming of the planet. We thought it was related to the Eternity Gate, and from a certain perspective it was. In his madness, perhaps even trapped underground for a time, Quelker had become obsessed with the emanation. Trazyn cut the sound dampeners on the field so they could hear the warbling, buzzing, shrieking line of trash glyphs that repeated from Quelker's vocal emitters. In fact, he broadcast it so strong it entered my own neural system when he attacked me. Thus, the quarantine. He waved a hand at the blue glow of the field. I am well, thank you for asking. My cryptex have run as many scans as Solemnes has scarabs, and I seem to be clean, yet it would be irresponsible to risk the dynasty. Only 2 more years, Orokin said with hollow cheer. You know, they say those last years are the hardest. Master Orokin has also given his professional opinion, repeatedly, even when no one consults him. What have you found? Said Phileas, uninterested in this banter. These vocalizations are not gibberish, said Trazyn. They are the Song of Serenade. He waved a hand, and a Phosglyph panel showed a waveform matched to a numbered graph. A match, see? 3211, stop. 1545, stop. 4131, stop. 5322. Over and over. It has infected his system. Did it give him the flare virus? Phileas asked, an edge of alarm in her tone. No. At least, I don't think that is possible. Orokin? Orokin stared directly back into Trazyn's oculars. It would not seem so. But clearly, Trazyn continued, he heard the emanation and became obsessed. Perhaps that's what he was studying when the virus began to take hold. He turned to worshipping it, slaughtering humans every few decades, even a few orcs, and dragging them to his lair. But what's interesting are his own neural loops. Trazyn opened a new Phosglyph panel, displaying a neural network pulsing with data, streams of information running along every root-like tendril and spiraling through coils. Quite active for a flare-touch savage, yes? I thought so. After I spent the first 2 decades of this quarantine trying to decipher the emanation without success, I realized that Quelker here had already worked the problem for several millennia. Perhaps instead of deciphering the signal, I should try to decipher him. I set up a middleman system, said Orokin, pointing to a bulky set of equipment dangling above the corrupted Quelker.
A separate neural network to let Lord Trazyn delve into the thought algorithms of the thing without having to connect his neural system directly. And I thank you for it. But what I have found, after far too much time with this subject, if I must say, is quite interesting. He thinks of nothing but books.
Books? Phileas said skeptically.
That thinks of books. Exclusively, said Trazyn. Specifically, it searches every text contained in the cryptex engrams, trying to decipher a message out of the emanation. Quelka believed it to be a book code, an old type of cryptogram that used a text as the key to decipher a message. Say I wanted to send you a message. First, we would agree on a book, the same edition, so the text lined up exactly. Then I would send you a message that says 627, and to decipher it, you would take your book and go to the 6th page, 2nd line and 7th word. See? Or perhaps the 6th chapter, 2nd page, 7th word. Or volume 6 of a series of works, 2nd chapter, 7th word. Or there are any number of combinations, said Orokin. Lord Trazyn has been working on this for a long period. I have heard about it extensively. So you just need to find the book, and you can open the Eternity Gate early, said Phileas.
That is the idea, said Trazyn.
If Quelka was correct,
if not, I've wasted a great amount of time.
And your own research, Master Orokin? She turned to him. How does it proceed?
I fear that Lord Trazyn has outdone me, he said. I do not expect results for some time.
Orokin was so practiced at obfuscation, it did not even sound like a lie. Serenade. 199 years until Exterminatus.
The day is coming.
I cannot wait. My whole system strums with the anticipation of it.
Soon equals soon. Each moment of waiting is a moment of preparation and study. This is no light task you undertake. It is fraught with danger. Have you told Trazyn of our progress?
No, I do not speak of you to Trazyn. His quarantine has ended, but he has not yet returned. Dynastic business. Both of us are increasingly called away.
That is good. He has left us alone to our work. From what you tell me, Trazyn is talented but grasping. It is best he does not know of our progress, even though we will need him.
Need him? Our equations are perfect. Your star maps, my equal, they are a thing of beauty. I had not realized that, as an extra-dimensional artifact, the Mysterios could be key to the star patterns of different timelines. By recalibrating, we can open the Eternity Gate as early as next...
Do not be jealous, my equal. We will need him for other reasons. You are more than he will ever be, it is true, but you are not all things. He has something we need.
Oh, what could he possibly have that we need?
2 things. 2 things he keeps on him. Open yourself to me, and I will show you. Do you wish to continue playing tiresome games with Trazyn and fighting petty dynastic wars? Or would you like to join me and ascend to bodies of starlight?
Orokin sat with that question a long time.
Please, Orokin, trust me.
Gradually, tenderly, he opened an information channel. He felt the smallest tug, the creeping sense of a being lingering at the door, sizing up a room before stepping inside. And the vision gripped his neural matrix like a bonfire, like a falling meteor burning in the atmosphere, like a city aflame. He saw zodiacs spin and stars wither in the heavens, planetoids crash and form new celestial bodies, a flaring staff, cracking seals, a gem, gleaming in the dark. Felt metal hands locked around his wiry arms of flesh, his feet kicking and shoulders dislocating as the relentless androids dragged him towards the emerald fires of the forge, towards the spiritual sundering of biotransference. And he recognized the death mask of one of his captors, and he knew what he had to do. Chapter 9.
Only the most parochial beings think that stars twinkle. That is an illusion of atmosphere, an observation of one who has never travelled space. The stars do not wink at us. They burn. They are unlidded eyes, boring into us with their gaze.
Orokin the Diviner. Serenade, 173 years before Exterminatus. No one expected the fleet to arrive that year. That was how it went with warp travel. Even if the ships were due, one could not depend on them making orbital anchor. This unscheduled stop was for a muster. The Serenade Maritime Infantry was to take part in the invasion of the Relic Belt, a set of remote worlds who had, it was only recently learned, declared their independence 2 centuries beforehand. And the second world of the belt was, much like Serenade had been, covered with water. The fleet had come to take on board water and collect what it could of the maritime infantry. A surprise regimental founding, as Vice Admiral Zemelka put it, before leaving within the month. The fleet had arrived by happenstance during the Settlement Festival, a once-per-decade celebration commemorating the pioneer landings on Serenade. And with this festival marking the 6,000th year of human habitation, the observances were particularly large. The festival was, as Trazyn pointed out, commemorating both the wrong date and year, but he was enjoying it nonetheless. Great pavilions stood in the parks and squares, celebrating local culture and achievements, historical and artistic galleries, banners recreated from the Greenskin War, classic films from the propaganda Pict industry, famous across the sector, shown nightly in the Flicker theatres, musical compositions for sacred, patriotic and civic occasions, and, of course, the famous Serenade Opera, whose performances were recorded and spread throughout the Eastern Fringe. Rumour had it even Calgar, the Lord of Macragge, had watched one and enjoyed it, though anyone with education claimed this belief was merely a meeting of wholesome local pride and extreme exaggeration. Given these 2 concurrent events, it was only a matter of time before the opera was seconded for a special performance, invite only, for the planetary governor and her guests. A group from Fleet Command, resplendent in their parade whites and so weighted with medals they needed to wear special mounting boards, mingled with Pict industry performers and religious authorities.
"There's Lady Tosserian, the Imperial Governor,"
Trazyn said, pointing through the one-way field at the box almost opposite. He was eating the evening up, so pleased to be out of quarantine that Orokin could feel the chilling pulse of the archivist's hood as it kept his cranium from overheating. Orokin wondered how far he had cranked his chronosense back, trying to savour every second.
"And next to her is Vice Admiral Zemelka. You see his uniform. Red facings and brass piping, unique to the frontier fleet of the Eastern Fringe. His left arm, folded at the sleeve, was lost in an engagement against Orc raiders when he was a post captain. It was his convoy of Turak's armoured transport we saw arriving, no doubt."
Orokin leaned against the wall of the theatre box. They had been lucky that all the boxes, save for the governor's, were shrouded with privacy fields, so they were both opaque and soundproof. A perfect place for political intrigue, private guild deals, and scandalous liaisons. A favourite playground of the planetary elite. In fact, the box's official occupants, whom Trazyn had infected with mind-shackle scarabs, were just a pair of young aristocratic lovers. They sat catatonic, their theatre thrones pushed back in the box to give Trazyn and Orokin more room to stand, blank eyes staring insensate at the aliens in front of them. Children of important people, judging by their clothing, though Orokin had no interest in this world and its Byzantine ideas of hierarchy, much as he did not care which paramecium ruled each water drop. And he especially did not care, given the gravity of recent events. Unexpected warp arrivals always made him jumpy and irritable. The tides of the Empyrean tore at the natural order of the universe, sent the wheeling stars out of alignment, and foiled his calculations. They turned solid prophecies into wild guesses, and that he did not like, particularly if the rumours were true, and through the strange eddies of the warp, this fleet had arrived decades before the time when it had left anchor. Things out of time bothered Orokin. They constituted unknown variables he'd rather keep to a minimum. Indeed, it was what made Trazyn and his Solemnes galleries so frustrating. Every object out of chronology was a clot in the bloodstream of time, a block that he could not see past. He had asked Trazyn to bring the Eldari gem, taken from the World Spirit, in case they had to accelerate their timeline. Said it was crucial for his research, that it might be useful to study the signal's effect on its crystalline form. Intimated that it would be useful for activating the Eternity Gate. It hung on Trazyn's hip, along with the other curios the archivist kept there.
"Vice Admiral,"
said Orokin, hoping Trazyn had not seen him staring at the collection.
"Not a lord."
"Oh, no, my dear Orokin. The ships orbiting above us are a mere task force of the larger Demi-Crusade fleet. The order of battle, if I am not mistaken, is Exorcist Grand Cruiser Voidhammer, 1 Defender escort cruiser and 3 sword frigates, plus various transport and supply ships, of course. A force far below any Lord Admiral, but a good long-range group for a man who's driving to get a 4th skull on his lapel."
"He does not look very pleased with his box seat."
"I suspect he does not appreciate opera. He seems a rather bluff voidsman, uncomfortable on dirt, as they say. And I can't imagine he will enjoy a play of such an intensely local type."
"Oh, didn't I tell you?
This opera is The Mischief King Revealed. First performance. 2 centuries ago it was Low Street Theatre. Now the height of sophisticated culture. And along the way the character was softened to be less seditious, I suppose." He settled his oculars back on the Vice Admiral.
"Ooh, that's quite a las pistol in his chest holster.
Engraved oak bone grip. Cut from a war trophy, I would guess. Perhaps from the one who took his arm.
Imagine losing an arm and not being able to replace it."
"Yes," said Trazyn, looking at a group of picked actors getting drinks in the back. "Not an eventuality we have to contend with any more."
"If you could go back, would you?"
"Go back to what?"
"The flesh. If one of these ridiculous fanatics actually found a species for us to transfer our consciousness to, or say if Nepereth's body let us fabricate a new, unspoiled race of Necrontyr, would you do it?"
Trazyn paused in his visual scanning and looked at Orokin square.
Of course I would. It would be my greatest joy to once again feel a soul within me, to taste and touch and feel. Would it? Because then you would be again subject to disease and death, to age. And I remember you were not so resistant to giving up such things. Old Archivist Trazyn, with his bent back from decades, leaning over scrolls and scrutinizing objects. Trazyn, with his squinting eyes and cane. I admit there would be sacrifices. I have not thought about it greatly, to be honest. That's why we're so terrified of the destroyers and the flare virus, aren't we? Our society was death-obsessed, true, but it was bodily decay that we feared most. Those two unfortunate classes of being are reminders that we are not immune. You talk about this human culture while ignoring your own. As you once told me, every society turns into insults and curses what they fear or are repelled by. Our kind has no biological processes, so we do not use profanities of bodily function. We are soulless god-killers with no fear of hell, so we do not blaspheme. But we do call each other low and bumbling, because we are highly civilized. I will call you old hunchback, and you will call me mad stargazer, because that is the root of our fear and shame. You have become quite the cultural analyst, Oregon. Perhaps my presence has improved you a little. And I remember how afraid you were that the tumours would take your wits. All the work you had done, so much of it up in that cranium of yours. But if you stepped into the forges, got a new metal body, think of all you could do. Catalogue the entire cosmos, if you wished. And all of it to keep you from thinking about how the things that had made Trazyn, Trazyn had burned off in those fires. Eaten by the deceiver. Or is that your secret? That you do not miss your soul at all? What brought this on? Because standing in a theatre surrounded by our enemies is a deeply inappropriate time to start a shouting match. You said that you resisted biotransference, that you went on the run, and they found you in your library. Yes, I remember it distinctly. You remember it because you were there, but you have it backward. I resisted and went on the run. I fled to the library and lived amongst the stacks, but it was my library, not yours. And you, Trazyn, you were one of the ones that came to drag me to the furnaces.
Trazyn said nothing, stunned.
But I remember distinctly, said Orokin. If that is true, I am sorry.
Orokin's monocular fluttered.
You are a signature talent, Orokin. Rival or no, the galaxy is a more interesting place with you loose in it. And I am glad we have come to a place, willing or not, where we are on the same side. No one deserves what happened during biotransference. No one. Our race leapt off a cliff on the promise that we had wings, and we were deceived.
Orokin looked away.
My only caution, my friend, is that you do not cling so hard to these memories. When the deceiver made these bodies we inhabit, he twisted them, and he twisted our engrams. I cannot remember what my old face looked like, or the place where I was born. It would not be far-fetched for the deceiver to have planted false memories, to sow discord amongst our kind. But if that is true, I am sorry.
Outside the field, the lights dimmed, and the curtain began to rise. Polite applause rippled through the crowd like a passing monsoon shower.
Let us watch the play, said Orokin. We will talk about it afterward.
Yes, Trazyn said, wrong-footed by the confrontation.
Afterward. It's quite short by our standards. Only 5 hours. It's no war in heaven. Thank the stars. I hate that play.
Orokin responded.
I would have thought you'd like the first 5 acts, at least. Because they deal with Nepereth?
No. Trazyn turned. Oculars narrowed.
Do you not know this? It is rumoured that the first 5 acts were secretly composed by Datamancer Vishani. Why else would Nepereth and the Amunos dynasty play such a prominent role?
Orokin pondered that, rolled it around in his logic coils, was about to speak when Trazyn interrupted him.
It's starting.
The Mischief King entered stage right, greeted by gasps from the audience. The performer was, in fact, a woman. Her high crown and imperial purple robe shimmered in the spotlights. A porcelain mask, white and painted with the image of a regal monarch, covered her face. Each step forward, on platform shoes that ended in stilt-like spikes, was a little miracle of poise and training. Diamonds dripped from the edge of her crown to the space between her eyes. But it was her third arm that caught the audience's attention. No rag-stuffed sleeve, this. It was a high-grade augmetic that moved and twisted with her body. Then she began her aria, and the world of Serenade started to fall. Chapter 10. One hand casts the high priest low. One hand crowns the slave. The third hand reaches from below and drags both to the grave. The Mischief King revealed. Act 2, Scene 4. Unperformed. From the first note, it was clear the performance would be unusual. Lady Torsarion, planetary governor of Solemnes, worried that it might be too exotic for her honoured guest. The whole thing had been stitched together last minute, and she had needed to essentially graft the fleet visit onto the existing cultural festivities. But one never knew how outsiders would react to serenade opera. Newcomers tended to either sit enraptured or entirely disconnected. Indeed, her own family, not originally native to Serenade, had not taken to the art themselves when they'd arrived 5 generations previous. Torsarion was one of the first to truly embrace and enjoy it, though she knew it was not to everyone's taste. Indeed, she had already let Vice Admiral Zmelka know that she would not be offended if, for instance, an urgent military matter called him away during the first intermission. He seemed to appreciate that. These naval officers on the Eastern Fringe were, after all, rough and wild types, some little different to rogue traders, and from their brief time together he did not seem a man who relished sitting still for 5 hours. But a glance told her that the guest of honour seemed interested in the performance. 30 seconds into the opening aria, he was leaning forward in the box seat, one hand gripping the marble railing. Then Lady Torsarion's gaze settled on stage, and she forgot the Admiral was even there. All eyes locked on the diva, dressed as the Mischief King. The enthralling movements of her arms, sweeping, rolling, undulating, and breaking like the waves of the vanished ocean. Lady Torsarion raised a pair of theatre glasses, trying to discern which limb was the augmetic, since they all seemed to move back and forth as if the singer's arms were double-jointed. Her own arms began to tingle, as if the sense of boneless languidness was settling into her own muscles. Notes weighed upon her. The opera glasses began to feel impressively heavy. And the song, atonal, eerie. Rather than flow into one another, each note stood alone, an exhalation that grew and died independently, as if unconnected to the rest. The lyrics, if indeed they were lyrics, were in no language Torsarion could understand. But despite their alien nature, they filled her head with images of black starfields, tunnels running with water, and the coiling of 2 great worms that met head to tail, eternally chasing each other in symbiotic balance. She wanted to understand. Believed that if she held the gaze of the performer long enough, the Mischief King would explain these revelations. And as she watched in rapt attention, she did see the aria singer's eyes bore straight through the tunnel of her opera glasses and flick a hand towards her. A cold wind rushed past, like the stories of ghosts and ghost gods the old settlers wrote of in texts long forbidden to the general public. Numbness, like the water of the deep sea, enfolded her. Torsarion dropped the opera glasses, realized drool was pouring from her open mouth, and felt the slow pressure as a hell pistol pressed the back of her head. Orokin was the only one who saw the shot. Trazyn, predictably, stood enraptured by the performance, likely recording every subtle movement of a wrist and stitch of the costume. It was, after all, such an unusual performance. So inhuman. Meanwhile, Orokin scried the audience, picked up loose muscles and slow blinking eyes. Seconds before, the air had danced with brainwaves as grandees chattered, flirted, lied, and pushed their little agendas. Neural activity spiked jagged when the singer walked on stage. Now there was only a slow, synchronous roll, like ocean waves that refused to break. He ran a divinatory program and detected warpcraft, mass hypnosis. And he saw the bodyguard behind the governor slowly draw his hell pistol. He blinked as he did it, as if puzzled by his own actions. Then he stretched the weapon out, thumbed the safety stud, and hung there a moment, the barrel making little figure of eights in the air. Crack! The governor's head slammed forward, struck the rail next to where her manicured hand still held the brass, slid sideways until she disappeared beneath the lip of the theatre box. No one moved. All stared at the singer and her high, clear notes, like a wet finger ringing a crystal glass. The governor's son and heir presumptive, sitting next to her, did not even blink when his mother's hand slipped from his. With a hesitant slowness that reminded Orokin of a long-ago underwater battle, the bodyguard swung the hell pistol towards the air. Crack!
"What devilry was that noise?" said Trazyn, oculars still fixed on the performance.
Orokin's vision snapped from box to box, seeing the grey film of the soundproof privacy fields flash like horizons lit by lightning. Flash, 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 flash. One stuttered and hissed as a man's arm broke through it and hung out, its sleeve stained with bright blood. He grabbed Trazyn's arm.
"This is an ambush!" "What?"
he said, breaking away from his cultural reverie.
"What are you raving about?"
Behind them, the door banged open. They turned. Standing behind them was a hunched man in the dark body glove of backstage crew, a black watch cap pulled low over his forehead. A purple bandana, the only hit of colour, swaddled his face. He carried an auto pistol, its extended magazine curving below the grip like a ram's horn. The Necrons, still cloaked in their illusion emitters, were invisible to him. He pointed the auto pistol at the mind-shackled couple.
"Orokin, move!"
Hard rounds tore out of the auto pistol, ripping holes in the armoured panelling of the box, cutting down the two lovers, sparking off the bodies of the two Necrons, smashing their illusion emitters. The auto pistol's slide hammered back and forth like a power tool, then abruptly clacked backward, ammunition spent. Gun smoke filled the small box, obscuring the assailant's vision. Then Orokin came out of the smoke, his head haloed by his golden hood like some venomous snake. He grabbed the attacker with surgical fingers and slammed him against the wall, denting the plaster.
"Spectromantic analysis says it isn't human," said Orokin.
Trazyn stepped out of the smoke and examined the choking assailant, ignoring its whimpering. He passed a thumb over the ridged crest on the forehead and forced open the whimpering mouth, breaking out a pointed tooth and extending an ocular to inspect the growth pattern.
"It's an alien-human hybrid. I've encountered them off-world. This one seems to be 4th generation, likely part of a larger uprising."
Orokin looked over his shoulder to the main seats, where ushers and picked industry stars were making their way down the aisles with axes and knives, murdering their way through the passive audience throat by throat. Each kill caused barely a ripple in the brainwaves of the neighbouring victims.
"Oh, you stupid bastard!" sneered Orokin. "You got us box seats to a coup!" Well, the reviews were very good.
Orokin heaved the hybrid through the privacy field, shorting it out with a pop. The cultist crashed into the orchestra pit, snapping a violist's neck and bowling over 3 more from the string section. The singer faltered at the interruption, and people began to scream. Across the gallery in the governor's fortified safety box, the hypnotized bodyguard pointed his shaking pistol at Vice Admiral Zmelka. The Admiral turned around, put a hand on the back of the chair, sensing all was not well, looked directly at the assassin. Crack! The hot-shot round slammed into the Admiral's chest with a dull thud, driving him backward into the box wall. A naval security trooper, dazed but moving, tackled the assassin, awkwardly wrestling for the gun in the confines of the booth. Another crack. A tongue of flame erupted out of the trooper's back, and his collapsing legs sent him tilting over the edge of the box seat, popping the invisible field. But the trooper was dogged. He dragged the assassin with him, 20 feet down into the panicking crowd below. Pure bedlam reigned in the theatre now. Surging crowds of aristocrats made for the exits, only to find them guarded by ushers wielding stub guns and backstage hammers. Plunging fire from the hijacked theatre boxes scythed into the panicking mass from above. The crowd fought in a dozen different directions, finding death at every exit. Orokin saw another naval trooper drag the Vice Admiral to his feet, stunned but alive. On his chest, his enormous rack of campaign medals and awards lay shattered and smoking, the thick metal decorations having taken the brunt of the Hell Pistol blast. The remaining security troopers grouped around him, shielding him with their bodies, trading fire between their box and the others. "We need to go," said Orokin. In the middle of the tumult, Trazyn watched the singer. She had abandoned her aria, and, glorying in the terror, removed her mask with a reverential slowness. Mauve skin and a bulbous forehead lurked behind the porcelain. Pointed teeth grinned. And turning, hands outward, she shouted in an indistinguishable language towards the back of the stage. A backdrop painted with a marble temple fell away, revealing a crouched monster. For a moment, Trazyn thought it to be a stage prop or a towering religious idol. But then the abomination raised its head and tasted the air with a mouth full of feeders. Came forward on enormous clawed hands and feet until it towered over the diva, 3 times her height. And, as it reared up, spreading its limbs and piercing the air in a voice high, clear, and atonal, Trazyn realized the creature had only 3 arms, the 4th ending in an amputated stump.
"I believe, like any good performer," said Trazyn, "we should make our exit."
"Is that the creature you unleashed on me?" shouted Orokin.
He needed to yell in order to make himself heard over the whir of the chainsaw.
"At the time, I didn't know they were infection vectors," said Trazyn, parrying the cultist's saw with one of his forearms, making the saw shed teeth before he crushed the hybrid's skull with a counterpunch. They fought on the run, tearing down the corridor behind the theatre boxes. "At the time, I thought they were just odd and dangerous. It turns out a single one can start an infestation in the native population, growing into a patriarch to head the cult."
Orokin formed Yinith's grid, summoning a hard light shield to guard their rear from the hybrid shooters emerging from the boxes. Stubber rounds flattened against the crystalline surface.
"So, you admit that you tried to kill me?"
Trazyn saw more hybrids massing at the end of the hall and skidded to a stop, summoning his obliterator. With a workmanlike swing, he crashed a hole through the wall to their right, letting in the cool night air.
"My dear Orokin, that was just a bit of fun."
A shot spanged off his shoulder.
"If I'd wanted to kill you, surely I would have used more than one. I have more, a great deal more."
And they leapt into the night, leg suspensors taking the impact as they landed on the cobblestone alley 3 stories below. Above them, hybrid insurgents gathered at the jagged hole, firing down at them, shots going wide.
"Why are they rising now?"
puzzled Trazin, taking shelter in one of the dark alleys of the old town.
"The ships,"
said Orokin, with bitterness, his fingers in the air, rotating a series of chrysoprase zodiacs that burned before him.
"The flotilla arrived early, the first Crusade fleet to visit since the initial infection. They saw a chance to decapitate Serenade's power structure and get aboard the ships."
"To spread the infection. Yes, that seems plausible."
"Which presents a larger problem. We know now why the humans sanctioned an exterminatus on Serenade. But originally, it would have happened in just over a century. So these naval officers are out of their place in the timeline. Trazin, I believe they may have exited the Empyrean a full 173 years before they were fated to. Therefore, the uprising and bombardment will start tonight."
"Is that what your calculations tell you?"
"As far as I can discern from this mess of a situation."
He spun a chrysoprase zodiac.
"It will take time to ready the ships, load the munitions. We have 4 days, 17 hours.
"Close. Can you open the tomb if we reach it?"
"I can,"
Orokin confirmed.
"Then let's get away from this ambush and underground before the lance strikes begin."
As they skirted shadows and wound through the cobblestone alleys, it was soon clear this was more than a single decapitation strike. Fires burned across Serenade City, from the veranda-girdled mansions of the island peak down to the monotonous hab slums of the Abyssal. Both of their illusion emitters had been chopped to pieces by the auto-pistol blast, and, on occasion, their healing necrodermises popped flattened slugs out of their surfaces, the living metal ejecting the foreign bullets as it self-repaired. No one paid any heed to the metal giants, perhaps dismissing them as variants of the Adeptus Mechanicus creations that roamed the streets, trying to secure power stations and workshops. The fighting over utility stations, Trazin estimated, would be fierce. 30 seconds into their journey, every light in the district shut off, blanketing the colonial centre in darkness. They reached Settlement Square to find a full engagement in progress. 3 companies of Serenade's maritime infantry, mustered for a marching demonstration in a plaza nearby, laying siege to the Opera House. Red lasbolts sliced the air, scorching the bone white of the marble columns black. Chattering hard rounds answered. A shoulder-fired missile rushed out from between pillars, chased by a powdery contrail. It detonated against the side of the plaza's antique fountain and sent up a billow of white dust, sending fist-sized chunks of marble flying out to fracture skulls. A guardsman screamed through a mask of blood, face torn by stone chips. The maritime infantry were in their summer uniform, olive tunics with rolled sleeves, sand-coloured berets rather than helmets. Many on parade duty didn't even have flak vests. And though they were intended for beachhead seizure and riverine operations, not urban combat, they were acquitting themselves well.
"I regret not adding a few Serenade units to the collection," said Trazin. "Lost the chance now, I suppose."
"How do we get into the cathedral?" asked Orokin. "And the tunnels?"
"No good,"
Trazin responded, pointing across the square, where a group of rubbery purple bodies were pulling themselves from an open sewer drain.
"The cult rules the underground. We're better off on the surface."
Engines revved. Cones of light spilled across the square. A convoy of up-armoured Thorax Prime transports tore around the Opera House's far side and away from the building. Their tracks threw debris behind them, spraying the mob of misshapen cultists that emerged from the alley, hissing and firing.
"That will be the Vice-Admiral," said Trazin, "or what remains of his staff."
The trailing Taurox, bearing the heraldry of the 5th Fringe Fleet, traversed its turret around to acquire the targets, Gatling cannon already rotating in preparation. Muzzle flash as long as Trazin's arm stabbed into the dark. hot orange tracer rounds butchering the unfortunate cultists where they stood. On one Taurox, a naval staff officer in dress whites manned a heavy stubber, blasting suppressing fire at the columned opera house entrance. His hat was gone, and he pressed the twin triggers with hands still sheathed in formal gloves. Another missile streaked from between the columns and struck a glancing hit to the transport side, but it continued on, armour-plating afire and the officer lolling backward in the hatch, his white uniform turning pink.
"If we were smart," said Orokin, "we would have killed Smelka before he evacuated. He's the only one with authority to trigger an exterminatus."
"Or I could have kept him," mused Trazyn, a tesseract labyrinth in his hand. "I have a feeling this night will be worth preserving."
It was. Monsters roam the streets of Serenade City, near-human hybrids in the uniforms of the maritime infantry, underground workers wielding saws and rock-crushing drills, their work uniforms daubed with the symbol of the two worms, one yellow, one black, chasing each other's tails, their bodies complementing each other to form a circle with no space between, eyes lined up in equilibrium. And they were fulfilling their promise to level society, to cast the high low and bring the low high. Now that the three-armed king had risen, all were indeed equal, from the pleasure palaces of the peak to the shanty towns in the basin. All were equal, because all were prey. But down in the Abyssal, resistance was light. The cult's heavy-hitting units had deployed to the old city, better to take out the planetary leadership. Here, the danger was merely roving militias and death squads, neither particularly hazardous to two Necron lords that could manipulate the time stream. With little need to hide, they made the pumping station in just over an hour, though they did so covered in the sticky purplish blood of at least 24 unfortunate insurgents. At one point, they encountered a Serenade heavy weapons company, blocking a wide avenue in an attempt to keep cult militias from massing and striking towards the old town. But the Necrons had come up behind the gun line, and crossing them was no trouble. Trazyn was still rubbing the Tesseract labyrinth, pleased with the impromptu collection, when they reached the pumping station. Orokin tore the station's door off its hinges, all pretense at stealth gone. They ducked into the building's deserted interior and made their way towards the accessway.
"You have the Mysterios?"
asked Trazyn.
"I do."
Orokin glanced at Trazyn's collection of curios.
"That's the Eldari gem, is it not? The solar gem."
"It is. What of it?"
"The ritual to open the Mysterios requires energy. I will need to channel it."
He held out a hand.
"May I see?"
"Let's go deeper first, friend Orokin. We are still too close to the surface for my liking."
They descended in darkness, saying little. From pipework to bare rock to the Necron tunnels, deeper and deeper into the planet's crust. At each turn of the tunnel, Trazyn drew a thumb-sized beacon from his dimensional pocket, activated it, and slammed it deep into the wall.
"And what is that?"
"You never know what might happen down here," Trazyn laughed. "Even if we open the gate, the exterminatus might break the planet's mantle, collapse the tunnels, and force us to burrow out with a flare. Lest you forget, there is a literal mountain on top of us. I would not want to emerge from the gate with no way back."
2 days down, the planet shook for the first time. It was a small shiver, a tremor.
"It's starting," said Trazyn. "I expect that's the Void Hammer on 1/8 power. A precision strike, tactical, an attempt to buy ground forces more time to evacuate."
Orokin nodded and dampened his auditory transducers. Trazyn's incessant chatter had distracted him for the past 2 days. The archivist spoke of everything, thinking aloud. The type of geologic strata they passed, pattern chains formed in the dust of the floor, the mining drills the cultists used as weapons, so suited to boring through Serenade's volcanic rock. That led to types of geologic excavation, fissures and seams, the ideal conditions for fossil formation, notable fossils he had collected on Serenade. The loquaciousness was all the more interminable because Orokin could hear Vashani whispering, encouraging, leading him deeper, her voice strengthening with every hour until their thoughts seemed to be the same. He tried to pass the time, remembering what it had been like to be filled with starlight, an experience his engrams could not fully capture, and imagining what it would be like for all Necrons to gain such transcendence. If, that is, he decided they should. It did not appeal to him overmuch to be one god among many. On the fourth day, Orokin's increasing ennui gained temporary relief when they met a gang of misshapen simian creatures, their alien gene stock corrupted far beyond anything he had ever seen. They attacked with massive arms, swinging pieces of construction beam as weapons, and goaded on by a shouting experimenter who struck their backs with a rod bristling with syringes. Then Trazyn drew a labyrinth, and the novelty was finished. The rest of the day consisted of a rocky descent, listening to Trazyn lecture on the higher degree of mutant aberration, among hybrids spawned from the unstable Imgal genetic stock. The floor was pitching now, the bombardment above nearly constant. They ran. By the fourth day, it was likely that 80% of the organic life on the surface was already dead, or so Trazyn claimed, when Orokin deigned to listen. He was murmuring as he ran now, collecting his focus for the task ahead, listening to Vashani tell him, in detailed logic chains, what he must do. Orokin didn't realize they had reached the reservoir until he heard water splash below his feet.
"Reservoir cracked."
"What?" he asked.
"I said the bombardments cracked the water table,"
Trazyn shouted. Rocks were tumbling from the cavern ceiling, crumbling as they hit the inch-high pool of water beneath their feet.
"The final bombardment's begun. Look, they've pierced the reservoir with a lance strike."
He pointed to the floor of the chamber, and Orokin saw a great sinkhole in the center of the room, dropping like a well into the darkness.
"Not long now,"
Trazyn smiled.
"Now, my equal."
"No," said Orokin. "Not long. Time to give me the gem."
"Do not ask. Take it."
A boulder crashed down next to Trazyn, and he raised a protective hand.
"Is this really the time? This chamber is unstable."
"He cannot go farther. You cannot let him."
Orokin moved fast, one hand grasping the gemstone, the other forming Xenosh's ballistic parabola. Trazyn saw the move, used the cloak, selected a different future. He grabbed Orokin's hand and crushed the fingers out of position, twisting them so they sparked and the hex died.
"What are you playing at, Orokin?"
"We can't both get there. She's told me. Only one of us."
He ripped the gem away, leapt backward, and summoned the Staff of Tomorrow, preparing for a fight. Trazyn did not rise to it. A rock the size of his cranium splashed down behind them.
"It's a replica, Orokin. You think I'd keep the real one hanging there when you seem so keen on it?"
He summoned his obliterator.
"Now, stop this foolishness. We have worked well together.
You sent aliens to kill me, dooming this world so we may not even open the gate. Is that what you refer to, Trazyn? You have unmade this world for a joke."
Orokin flashed forward, striking out, then pulling his blow, catching hold of Trazyn's obliterator and yanking it. All he did was draw them close together, face to face. The cavern rocked as a slab the size of a monolith dropped, smashing on the cavern floor.
"I didn't want to do this, Orokin. I prepared for it, but I didn't want to do it."
Orokin wrestled for the obliterator, found it dissolving in his hands, noticed the prismatic shine of a dimensional pocket opening. His dimensional pocket. Trazyn stepped away, Mysterios in hand, and slipped it into his own dimensional pocket. "Goodbye, my colleague," Trazyn said. Orokin threw himself on the Archivist, and Trazyn hugged him, locking his arms around Orokin's scrawny frame, carrying him to the ground. Orokin thrashed, screaming, beating Trazyn with his head, then realized that nothing was there. Trazyn's body was an empty shell, an exoskeleton, left after the insect crawls free. He heard a sound that no mortal has lived to describe. The sound of a planet being executed. With a roar so loud that it overwhelmed his systems, the chamber collapsed, battering him, crushing him, burying him. Orokin the Diviner, seer of the Necrontyr, lay shattered beneath a mountain. Trazyn's algorithmic spirit raced through the relays he'd buried in the tunnels, screaming from point to point as the tunnels collapsed behind him. Each burned out with his passage, sealing the way. Through the Necron tunnels, through the bedrock, up through the pipes and into the firestorm atmosphere of Serenade. A planet that by rights no longer deserved a name. He poured into his surrogate on the Lord of Antiquity's bridge, ready to give the order. "Surface and run attack vector. I want the capital ship crippled on the first pass. Do not destroy it. We want them to be able to withdraw. Calculate fire for extreme damage. Get them to reroute power from lance batteries to shields." If the exterminators continued, the Eternity Gate would be destroyed, but they still had time to forestall that inevitability. The Lord of Antiquity, birthed beneath the surface of Serenade's second moon for millennia, rose, shaking the lunar dust from its hull. It sheared away in solid clumps, sloughing off and forming a crescent-shaped crater. And it turned, sweeping in on the flotilla like a raptor that espied a flock of songbirds picking at insects. Weapons batteries charging, finding firing solutions on 3 different vessels. He was about to give Vice Admiral Zmelka another medal for his rack. Fire! 4 hours later, the only Imperial ships remaining were the wrecked hulks of the escort cruiser and 2 Saw-class frigates, floating broken-backed in the dull light of Serenade. Trazyn opened a channel, searched for a signal. "Orokin?" he broadcast. No answer. "Orokin, identify your position and I can excavate you." Nothing. The only answer was a pulse, a numeric code running over and over through the surface. 3211, stop. 1545, stop. 4131, stop. 5322. Trazyn was looking at the grey surface of a dead world. The Song of Serenade, the eternal aria of the Eternity Gate, was the only thing that lived there.